Let's do it.
Right, we are recording. Hopefully that will be all right. Mr. Creamer, hello, sir. It is a pleasure to have you.
We're recording.
Yes, we are recording.
Recording, yes. Woo! How you doing?
I'm glad to finally get this up and running. It's been a long time in planning, and differences in time zones don't help, do they? But we're all part of this wonderful army, so it's a real pleasure for me to be able to speak to you and to have you spare this time to talk about your compositional techniques and your pieces.
Yeah, sure. Hey, have you had supper yet, Morgan? Have you had lunch?
I've had my dinner, yeah. I had a while ago. So
well, you don't mind me having some supper?
You help yourself.
Some Vegemite. It's good stuff.
I'll take your word.
You ever tried it?
Nope.
Have you ever tried it? Oh, mate, you haven't lived. You haven't lived. I'll take another bite for you. Mm.
You can eat it all.
She's good, mate.
So
Where's your theme song? Where's your theme song? You playing your theme song?
I'll do that another time. I'm too eager to get to the nuts and bolts of Creamer composition, me.
You want me to play your theme song? Yeah.
No.
Is that it?
Yeah, that was an off-the-cuff suggestion to a friend, and before I knew it, they'd jingled up the tune for me. So, thank you very much.
It's good. It's good to know people.
Well, they volunteered it. I just made the suggestions. But,
You just tell them how it is.
Well, they're crazy enough.
You the man, Morgan.
They're crazy enough to run this project. So, is Sam okay, or Mr. Creamer, or my lord? I mean,
Your Highness? No. I'm not the Queen. Nowhere near it. I'm a fan of Queen. Do you like Queen?
As in the person or the group?
I think, well, you're British, so I'd say you probably like the person more than the group. But I'm a fan of the group.
So. I prefer. Never met the person.
Bohemian Rhapsody, mate. You should get a bit of Bohemian Rhapsody as your theme.
I'm not against it, but it's a band in our house.
It's band.
It is, yes, for one line.
Brass band. Right.
It's band, not allowed to play it.
All right, you can press leave meeting now if I've overstepped it.
My parents don't like it for one line. That's included in it.
I just heard a rumour from Dean Jones that said that you were a massive Queen fan, so he might be right, he might be wrong.
No, definitely.
Oh, well. Have words with him, mate.
Totally displaced. Anyway, let's do the nitty-gritty, mate.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've been composing for a long time, but when I sort of started...
I'm not that old, Morgan.
I didn't say you were. You could do it at 5 years old for all I know. I mean, I first heard when Faith is a Victory came over here, and that kind of knocked my socks off because it was a really interesting take on a really old tune. But when did you start actually writing, and that writing was able to be played by other people, not just you tootling along on your instruments?
It's a bit of a tough one. I remember as a young man in when I started attending band practices with the core band, probably about at the age of 14, 15. I remember scratching down some ideas on paper, and as a true percussionist, you have a lot of things hiding around in your stick bag, and the manuscripts of the things I was writing down actually hid in my stick bag for a little while, just waiting for me to get the courage to go up to the bandmaster and say, hey, can you have a look at this? And thankfully that never happened, because I know now that it was a load of rubbish. But apart from that, that sort of stemmed, a bit of manuscript writing before Sibelius really took off, and Finale and music notation software as such being widely available. After that, the core I was at, which is a little core called Toowoomba. It's about 2 hours drive from Brisbane, which is on the east coast of Australia. Toowoomba's inland, and that's where I grew up. I spent probably 22 of the best years of my life there, or 22 of my only years at that time. And the core band, unfortunately, was a band that stopped after quite a while. It dwindled in number, and it's we just didn't have the players anymore on a regular basis to actually put up a team. But it tended to be that we also had a lot of woodwind players in the core, and we also had a fairly decent contemporary team with piano, bass, guitar, and drums, and a few singers. So when the band sort of dismissed, if you like, or stopped playing regularly, a lot of the brass players decided they wanted to play along with the contemporary team, which is great, and still highly, highly encouraged. But we had no charts for them. So I ended up doing a lot of compositional boost through that avenue, writing 4-piece brass section charts for a very long time. Eventually those 4-piece brass charts ended up becoming band charts over in Australia at the moment, heavily influenced by such series as Hallelujah Choruses and the Australian equivalent, Instrumental Praise. There's a lot of what you probably call flexible instrumentation worship music. There's a lot of that, but it's for me particularly. Now I'm at Carindale Core in Brisbane. We've had instances where we could have up to nearly 40 or 50 musicians on stage on a Sunday morning, which is
that's a lot.
Which is something like that's a 30-piece brass band plus a rhythm section of 4, plus up to about 6 singers, and sometimes we might have a brass section or a few string players or something on deck as well. And yeah, it's quite the experience. So that's where I got that's where composition for me really got a boost, was actually writing on a local level for my own core at the time, and writing for what was needed. And eventually, that turned into bigger scoring, bigger groups, groups with a bit more fame around the world as well. But yeah, it's always good to have a question like that, Morgan, where you turn around and you think, where did you start? Where is your basics? Where have you gone from? Where have you come from? So thanks.
No, it's something it's very interesting, because you don't, pick up a pen and paper and start doing it. Poets sometimes start in school, or artists will just doodle away. So having seen the quality of your work, and virtually every composer I've ever spoken to said they start with 3 or 4 players, go for the unity, go for the small ensemble, and then work up. You seem to have done ISB, Melbourne Staff Band right out the gate. So it's nice to hear that it did start from somewhere and it's growing. But I think what I would like to ask you personally is, having listened to a lot of your music, what does surprise me as a fairly young man yourself, your music, there's a lot of old choruses in there. I mean, In the Love of Jesus, Faith is the Victory, For the World, Telling It. I mean, that's a Sidney Cox one. I wouldn't have thought that would have come naturally. You'd have been picking up some of the more contemporary stuff. So what's the story behind underneath really old choruses and jazzing them up a bit?
Firstly, you just wait until you get to my age. and you'll see what it's all about.
Okay. Just for instance, if you're willing to, how old are you?
34.
Right. Secret to everyone, this Monday I'll be 43.
Hey, you're doing well.
I've got 10 years on you, boy.
Mate, you don't look a day over 21 twice.
I feel it.
No, going back to your question, it's been a real passion of mine for quite some time, and even dating back to the days where I did start writing on a chord level. And mind you, before brass parts I was writing was not brass band parts; they were filler parts. You know, they were your Tower of Power horn section type charts. So it wasn't full on writing; it was just punches here and there, and a few shot notes, and some interesting filling lines to make it happen. But at that point in time, at the core, we were going through what we needed to find as a good balance. We couldn't have, still with the band demising as such, we couldn't have only contemporary music because that's what the music team only played. We still had to have a good balance. So with that also came the need to write up complete rhythm section arrangements with horn section arrangements of hymns as well. Mm-hmm. And obviously, it is possible to go through the tune book and play hymn after hymn and add piano, bass guitar, and a drum kit beat behind it, but it doesn't always work because the chords are very rapid. Some songs, even like, let's say, Bethany, for example. The chord changes every single beat. And for a guitarist, their left hand is changing every single note, basically. And it's very hard, not to mention the key that it's put in the tune books. They're brass player friendly, not so much rhythm section. So on that, I was sort of in a position to make some old songs new with a good beat behind it, and still, have the traditional flair of a brass line in it as well. And that seemed to be something that worked for me. And as they sort of developed into congregational arrangements for band as well as rhythm section, as I moved on from the core, that sort of moved on to band pieces, and the rest is history, I guess. The other interesting point I'd probably make on that question, though, Morgan, is copyright.
Yeah.
A lot of army tunes and hymns of the church are considered public domain.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's actually a lot easier to write within that genre where you don't have to deal with a lot of copyright. I'm not opposed to writing a lot of modern songs, or doing up the latest Hillsong arrangement or anything like that. In fact, I think we were talking only 20 minutes ago about the prelude on Anastasis. Yes. The Melbourne Staff Band did. And, that in itself is what I would consider a modern hymn. Because it does have 4 verses, and it does have some meaning behind it. So I would call it a modern hymn. But being published by Hillsong, there's a lot of copyright behind it. So the basics is unless you're guaranteed that you can cough up the money to pay for copyright if you want to distribute that music yourself, or send it straight to consideration for publication, which is where they look after that sort of side for you. It's okay if you're only giving it to maybe one or two bands, and they're only using it as local use. But if you were to, if I was to only write contemporary music and then distribute it to every man and his dog and their corps, that would be a legal copyright breach. So that's, in a nutshell, why you probably see a lot of old army choruses and hymn tunes jazzed up in those new styles.
It's really interesting because you look at a lot of modern composers, and I mean, particularly when I heard Telling It, and I was talking to John Larson about The Kingdom Is Theirs, it would not have been a natural choice to pick those kind of tunes. They would have been kind of on the dusty shelf. It's kind of, for those people who don't know about the musicals and Sidney Cox songs, he's kind of maybe not really as good as he used to be now, although I absolutely love him. To pick songs and tunes from that source for a man of your modern, your young years, I find that very unusual, because you'd have gone for something like, I know, Chris Tomlin or Graham Kendrick or something, rather than something as old as, Hosea from 1968-69. It's not as kind of within memory.
I think this probably touches base a little bit on probably one of your questions a bit later on down the track here, Morven, is that my favourite Salvation Army songs, which I'm sure you're probably bound to ask me a bit later on.
It's on the list.
Let's get it over and done with now, because it's the last question for everybody else. I don't have a song as such, but the whole Gowans and Larson era of musicals. Again, growing up in the corps that I did, they were nuts about Gowans and Larson. My grandparents. Did you find that
in Australia? They did go a bit wow for them.
Well, I mean, yes, and rightly so. Yeah, there it is, the blood of the lamb again.
I can even
how many interviews? That's it. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of memorabilia of that. But in my teen days, I did have access to the score of Hosea.
Ooh.
And that was very fun to study at the time, and it was very, very cool to, that's the one, and it was very, very cool and lots of fun to pick apart the chords, the harmonies, and the even the text and the background of that particular musical, and that's what probably gained my respect for Gowans and Larson, not just being generals themselves, but particularly the talent that they had to produce that sort of stuff on that level, and come out with some absolutely hit tunes of the army at that stage.
Absolutely agree. I'm a massive Gowans and Larson aficionado anyway, and the Gowans and Larson musicals website, something I created a few years ago, is still running, and all the tunes are on there. And the response I get from people who remember it 30, 40 years ago, brilliant. And you get some new composers who just occasionally pick up a tune, but it's more the well-known ones, maybe, that's been in the songbook. And some of your tunes have really given a good twist on them and given them a new lease of life. So it's good of you to have done that, and it's a real blessing. And
well, the kingdom is theirs, Morven. That's actually due for publication last month. So I'm not sure if it actually did, or whether what's happening there. But a lot of bands have been after that chart for quite some time after hearing about it, and obviously the ISBs recorded it, and also the Melbourne Staff Band have recorded it as well. That was a commission, that chart, for the Sydney Youth Band. And they had a weekend at my corps in Queensland, so they did the trip up, and the theme for the weekend was the Kingdom, and the scripture that went along with it, there was no better song for it than You Don't Have to Be Clever. And some of the background behind that particular piece of music, you notice that there's so many different musical styles represented. And that sort of goes along with the text, with the fact that, you know, there's so much diversity in the kingdom of God, and there's a place for everybody in it. Yeah. Doesn't matter if you're black or yellow, or if you're, you know, there's a reference to the old Sesame Street rubber ducky in the middle of it, and you know, that's a bit of a play on the line that's you don't have to be squeaky clean or whatnot. So there's a bit of tongue in cheek, and that was a lot of fun to write that one. So yeah.
So the online videos that have been done for I think it was Anytime, and there was another one that just had that sort of quintuplet band session with the old tootlers on the horns and stuff. How did they all come about?
I think you're referring to a recording session I did, probably 5 or 6 years ago now.
Yeah, it probably is.
It was purely a little bit of fun, and it was a chance for me particularly to get a couple of these. Well, we actually probably recorded about 6 pieces of music on that session, but I think I only ever uploaded 2.
Yes, I want to see the other 4 now.
I'll have to dig them out and find them.
Oh yes, please.
That session itself was it was a chance to play with some good players around the place, because Brisbane's a place that has about nearly 10 core in the city, and there's probably about 4 decent sized bands in that vicinity. So it's good to sort of mix and match players a little bit as well. And what we did for that was purely just get a few tracks down so I could make sure they were playable. And if they worked all right, yeah, I'd go and publish them. Both of those charts later on then went on to be published in the Australian journals as well. And yeah, that was just a little bit of fun more than anything, but it worked out really well. I'm sure there's probably a lot of drummers out there now that are watching Anytime, to see how to play that second line Dixieland style. I actually spent some time in New Orleans last year. It was absolutely mind-blowing. It was fantastic. Just to hear it authentically, you know, the sousaphones and the clarinets and the actual authentic style played by authentic musicians that have been doing it for 30 odd years, if not more. So it was good fun.
Yeah, it looked really interesting because obviously the quality of playing for an ad hoc band is just really right up there. I remember sort of hearing other bits like High Overrule, which is a wonderful piece, and you know, Hold the Fort. Now we've talked about this before, but I'd like to put this on the record if you like. Your encounter with Bill Hines, who is a living legend in the Salvation Army. Now you took one of your scores because you were having a kind of an issue with it. So which one was it, and why? How did Bill Hines get to look at the manuscript?
Well, firstly, Bill's an absolute legend. I've had the absolute privilege of working with him probably on 2 occasions that he's been to Australia in the last 5 or 6 years. I still have a lot of respect for him, even though he told me off in the middle of his Jericho Revisited.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's scripted and everything, but that's okay. We had a good time. But yeah, Hold That Thought. Obviously a play on words for the title, being based on Hold the Fort. the hymn tune. Usually that's a very march, very regal type hymn tune. But I had this inspiration to turn it into a funk. It's got a lot of inspiration.
You think of in army music, is it?
Well, that's it. You don't think of it, and it's actually sometimes I think about trying to find a style that army bands don't play much.
That's virtually all you're using, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, Rusty Gate swing is a genre now for Salvation Army bands because they don't play swing very well most of the time. They swing as well as Rusty Gate does. But the styles, like High Overall is a samba. Yeah. And it's a very lively samba. Telling It is a salsa. Yeah. Faith is the Victory, it's a mambo. And then, in the army, we see a lot of swing, we see a lot of rock, and we see a lot of bossa nova type Latin, but we don't sort of get out of that bubble. So my thinking is trying to expand on those styles a little bit more to give something different. Being a rhythm section player by trade, I've been playing drums since the age of 4. So that's 30 years this year. I've also played bass guitar for a very long time as well. And on top of that, I've done my service as songster pianist over time, and I don't know how good I was at it, but I did it. And I've got that understanding of what it is that makes that style work. So with Hold That Thought, the first thing was the style. There's a lot of influence there from modern funk tunes that would be familiar. The main one, when it sort of opens into it, is the you can tell that it's inspired by Herbie Hancock's Chameleon. It's got that whole it's got that real bottom end sort of drive, and that's very, very similar to Chameleon. You'd hear in the middle of that section there's a influence of the Jackson 5's I Want You Back, that sort of thing. It's that sort of funky bass line. And in the later part of that chart, when we're on the home stretch, which jazz musicians call the shout chorus, you'll hear some classic other modern funk licks from like Uptown Funk and a few of those Tower of Power type signature horn lines. So that was a lot of fun to put together. But when I did put it together, I put it together with the anticipation of being submitted for publishing in the Arthur Gollage series in Australia, which is 8 parts. It's basically 8 parts plus your optional soprano, flugel, bass trombone, and percussion. And Bill was at a symposium for composers that we have in Australia that year. We get together every couple of years, and all the writers in the country, there's usually about 25 of us, and it's a great time. Bill was the guest that year, and like we had one last year, and Len Valentine was out for that. And it's been a good way to sort of pick the brains of these living legends. But Bill said to me, he pretty much took my chart and had red pen and graffiti all over it by the end of it. A couple of things were he wrote articulation markings all over it, and he said, no, you can't write simile in this style because they're just going to go back to playing what they know. If it's a new style, you need to make it dummy proof. You need to make it that they've got no way of playing it wrong. You need to be smart about how you're doing it. And that's why in a lot of my charts too, you'll probably also see that the tuba parts are not identical. They're both playing different things, because if they were both to between the B flats and the E flats, if they were to play the same thing, they'd probably have a very high chance of hyperventilating by the end of the concert. And the other thing that Bill said to me was like, no, this can't be 8-part because your musicians are not going to be Canadian brass. They're salvo musicians that you're publishing for, and you need to take that into account. So a good band needs to be able to play this, not an average band. So he said, you need to expand this to festival series scoring before you submit it. And since then, that's been done. There's also been a big band chart that I've done for it, as with a lot of those other titles. Being a jazz guy myself, it's only right that I do that. On top of that, there's been Birmingham Citadel have recorded Hold That Fort,
yeah,
and they do a very, very good job at it.
Yeah.
They sit in that groove very well because they have some very good percussionists and tubers driving that. Shout out to Gav at Birmingham, good mate of mine.
And his sister, Hannah. Yep, got to mention them. Lovely people.
Doing a lot of work for me at the moment. Oh, Gav, he's good guy. And then the Amsterdam staff band have recorded it as well.
Yeah, I know. They seem to be your band in residence, don't they? Every time you do the Creamer piece on your Facebook, they're like, right, I want first read.
That's it. They're I don't think it'd be right to call them vultures, but yeah, they are very supportive. Very keen.
I think they're
not vultures saying, give me your work.
They're waiting at the printer when it comes out, aren't they?
No, who reads printed music now anyway? But yeah, no, the Amsterdam staff band have been very supportive, and so have Birmingham, particularly with some of those charts like High Overall and Hold That Fort, and so it's going well.
It's really good to hear that it's being played internationally and bringing a lot of blessings. So from a Brisbanean, if I can use that term, composer point of view, who are your mentors that side of the world? Who are the people that help continue to inspire you? I mean, you've got some fantastic Australian composers these days who are really continuing. So where does Creamer go when he needs a bit of inspiration? And
where do I go when I need inspiration? I go away from everybody for a start. But if I need that extra little bit of second opinion, I have some very good musical friends that I talk to on a very daily basis as well. One of my good mates is a chap called Don Main, and he's a brilliant trumpet player, and he's a keen jazz writer. And, he's always very, very keen on what I'm doing. I'm very keen on what he's doing. We've played lots of gigs together here and there where we can, within distance. So much easier now. So he's good. And there's a few others, even core musicians that are very keen on what I'm doing. We'll have a good chat about what's in the pipeline and how to develop it and who's going to get it first and who's it for, what commission or whatnot. But aside from that, living influences, I've had a lot of good chats and a lot of good times with Barry Gott, particularly when he was living in Brisbane. That was a little bit more accessible. I think there was a running joke there when we were organising this that people wanted to know what my relation was to Barry. We'll just say that we're brothers in swing.
I can thoroughly, He's almost the granddad of Army Swing, isn't he? With Daniel and Lightwalk. I mean, he just
he probably can't be my brother in swing then, can he?
Absolutely. He can.
Daniel was published in the year that I was born, so take what you want from that. Brian Hogg is another one.
Yeah.
And he is a very, very smart man. He's particularly heading up the editorial process of the Australian publications. He is very smart. He's very switched on, but he's also a very gentle man. He'll tell you if something's wrong, but he's not going to come in guns blazing saying, you need to fix this now. It's just like, don't you think we could do this better? Or you've doubled the third of the chord 5 times. Do you really need to do that? I mean, people like me will probably always have an argument to come back with saying why I did it. But, they're good. They're good quality. Internationally, there's a few guys internationally that I look up to. Some of them I have met, some of them I haven't. Excuse me, that's a Rona. No. Hold back. It's not infectious by Zoom, is it? I'll clear it up. I don't have Rona. Bill Himes, as we said, he's very influential, even when it's not in contact. It's through the language of music where he's influential. You go out and you study the scores of these legends, what they've done. You go and look at them. There's other great writers out there now, even modern day writers as well. I probably struggle to single it down to a number because there's so much great music. But obviously the greats like Himes, guys like James Curnow.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of meeting Kevin Larson when he was out in Australia a couple of years ago, and he's just larger than life. He's just great. He's tall. But he's brilliant, and he had a lot of encouragement there as well. Basically, he's like, once you're in, and that's it. And here I am. Kev's a great guy, and he produces a lot of good music. There's a lot of unsung heroes too. I think inspiration for me doesn't necessarily come by what's on the score either. I think it comes in what is behind the name of the composer as well. Who is that person?
Yeah.
If they are doing everything they can to be a decent human being in life, that lives a life of humility and grace, and obviously starts all of their compositions on their knees. They're the guys that I think of. One thing that sticks with me for a while there now is like I said earlier, I was privileged to go to the States and Canada last year on holidays. And it was great fun. Had its moments touring with a 6-year-old, but it was good fun. And one of the most memorable things I'll ever have is we landed in John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City, and after the rigmarole of going through airports as you do internationally, my wife is like, have you booked an Uber yet? Oh, you got one organised? I'm like, yeah, it's cool. You haven't had your phone out and you haven't got your card out. What's going on? Why haven't you booked it? I said, I've got it under control. You're good. Get outside the gates, and I get a phone call. I'm like, yeah, cool, we'll be overseen. And she's like, who's that? I said, it's one of my mates. What, you got mates in New York? Oh, yeah, you've got plenty. And here's Ed Milecrist picking me up from the airport. And we had a great chat between JFK and Manhattan in traffic, as you do. We got cut off by everybody, including a funeral procession in New York. It was awesome. But we were in a big big tank of a van. It was great fun. But that's the sort of guys that are an inspiration to me. Sometimes it's not so much about writing notes on a page. It's about who you are as a person and what you stand for, what you believe in, and what your nature is. I think that was evident to me in the legacy that Ray Stedman Allen gave.
Yeah.
I wasn't fortunate enough to ever meet him. He just couldn't hold on.
I know he's sort of Rosemary better.
Yeah.
He's lovely.
But Ray couldn't hold on a little bit longer to meet me eventually, but that's okay. Won't hold it against him. But yeah, from what I hear about him and his legacy, not just a brilliant writer, he was an encourager.
Yes.
That's the sort of guy I want to be. It's not about the notes.
On the way.
No, I try my best.
Yeah, I mean, I look at your published music on the index, and there's energy, there's vitality, there's difference. I mean, I don't have to ask you about originality because these are all original in their own ways. Each piece almost stands up. You know, the marches are not just standard marches, your hymn tune arrangements. They've all got an individual kind of fingerprint to them, but it's your fingerprint. I mean, there's a lovely image. I look at In the Love of Jesus, a cross-section of the tune. It's not all in-your-face percussion. In Trouble on England's Lane, a lovely section there that doesn't have to be aggressive in the way that perhaps some of the songs are. So you're cross-spectrum already, and you're building on that, and you're learning it. You know, you've said about talking about your inspirations and talking to people and learning from them, which is wonderful. So, have you got a favourite band piece? Not necessarily that you enjoy playing, but you know, that comes on the headphones. Yep, I love that.
I'm very much a fan of some of the stuff that the New York staff band's been pumping out for the last little while. Unfortunately, when I was in New York, it was in off season. It was in summer break, so I didn't get to visit the band in rehearsal. But you know, they are a very, very good band, and particularly some of their latest recordings. I'll happily go and listen to Living Power, back to back. And I was privileged to be able to play that in my core band last year, I think it was. Semper Fidelis, Martin Corner. Yes. That's another ripper on the same CD.
He's about an hour up the road, Martin.
Yeah. What's up, Martin? Yeah. I think there are probably a couple of the more modern ones that I'd happily go back and say, yeah, I want to listen to that again. Let's put that on repeat. Yeah. There's a few others as well. I think at the moment it's probably a couple of those two. If you were to ask me what my personal favourite of what I've probably done myself, it changes all the time.
Yeah.
What's the one that grabs me every time? It's very interesting. I have actually been close to moved to tears by my own work. It sounds very egotistically, but it's amazing when you can pen something on paper, not knowing that same piece is going to rip your heart out at some stage, and it's going to really hit you where you need it the most. I think of, we talked about Prelude on Anastasis before, and particularly around Easter. And, it was purposeful the way I wrote that. It's designed as a Easter Sunday prelude.
Yeah.
And I was very much looking forward to playing it this year, but Rona had another idea in that. But that's one of the pieces that, I look back at that and I listen to that, and I don't even think about the fact that I wrote it, or arranged it, I should say. But it gets to me. It gets me every time. You know, I'd say that's probably one of my favourites that I've actually done.
I think I was in Felixstowe Court Hall a few years ago when Salvation was doing a concert there, and they had Darren Shaw doing the comparing, and they played Guardian of My Soul. Now, he's obviously heard that loads of times. And he just sat there and said, you know, even though I knew what the music was, he said, I created it, I remember writing it. He said, it still moves me. He said, it's like an alien piece of music sometimes. He said, but it still moves me. So, yeah, I don't think there's any at all.
Another interesting one, Morven, is the hymn tune arrangement that I did on Wells. Now, I shocked a lot of people when that one got published, because everyone's used to me putting out what you British people would call lollipops. I shocked a lot of people with that one because it was actually a bit of a tearjerker. It was one that had a lot of emotion in it. And when they decided they were going to publish it, Simon Gash actually said to me from editorial, he's like, what are your actual thoughts behind this? What were the words you were associating with it? Because it's so much text oriented and word painting through the actual score to convey the emotion that sits perfectly with the tune of Rock of Ages. And I actually honestly had to come back at him and said, I just thought it was a good tune.
Fine.
I didn't even think about the words. I didn't even think about the words. The words just did it for themselves.
Yeah.
And that was it. I said, oh, Rock of Ages goes to that tune. Okay, we'll go with that.
What else is in the pipeline then? Have you got any commissions or anything burning to come out of the Creamer Central Core?
Mate, this is a very, very interesting time to be alive as a composer.
As I'm not, I'll take your word for it.
Well, stereotypically, people would think that being in lockdown, you have so much time on your hands and so much space for creative inspiration to come. So stereotypically, people are going to say, well, what have you done with the last 6 months? Or what have you been doing in lockdown? You know, we're expecting some great things at the end of this. Personally, myself, I don't feel a lot of difference with the lockdown that we're in because I'm an essential worker, as are you, Morten.
Yeah.
The food industry in retail is just absolutely booming at the moment, particularly in Australia. Particularly in the toilet paper aisle. So for me, I'm still working 38 hours a week, and it is what it is. It feels like life hasn't changed. So for me, the other thing that I'm a bit wary about, and I've conveyed these thoughts with a few other people, I could write millions of charts in this lockdown period, but there's only going to be so much new music that bands can see at once when we all get back together. So to me, I actually lack inspiration with that regard. Yeah. I think, well, what's the point of writing something now if it's not going to get played for another year or even two? That you could nearly say that's a negative way of thinking, but you can't help but sort of put that realistic spin on where it's at.
It's reorientated because, I mean, you could quite easily say, right, when I get home, I'm going to write that hymn tune arrangement, but I'm holding back. So when the time is right, you know, Derek Lance or whatever his name is of New York Times said, I want a euphonium solo for 2022. We're doing a tour of Japan. I want a euphonium solo. Can we have a Creamer arrangement? And you then said, I've had the rest. I haven't been pushing myself.
Look, I don't think they'd be going to China. So Japan's a good choice.
Yeah.
Let's just say, you know, if a commission came in, I would work at it. I'd try and find it. And if there was ever a time for a commission to come in, now's probably it. Mm-hmm. While bands are not rehearsing, while corps are essentially in recess, unless they're doing their own digital online thing, which a lot of corps are. And I give top marks for the people that are doing those things, because it takes a lot to change. The other thing that I think of, though, is that I'm very much a write by inspiration guy. I don't deal with commissions. I wouldn't say I don't deal with them well, but I don't deal with them as well as when I do my own thing. If I've got inspiration there, it will develop itself. But when I'm trying to get blood out of a stone to get something on paper, when nothing's there, that's a bit harder. So in this lockdown period time that we've got between, you know, we're starting to see a few restrictions actually ease in Australia. As of next week.
Yeah.
And that's good, because Australia has actually done very well handling the coronavirus. And my heart goes out to friends in the USA and Canada and the UK, because I don't like to boast, but unfortunately, the results haven't been as great in those countries. But for us, even though restrictions are going to ease somewhat in the coming weeks, months, and we're looking at a fairly normal July at this stage, it could be longer. It could be longer. We're heading into winter very shortly, so it could be very much longer. In this time, it's still going to be a while before bands can still get back together, even if we are able to get out. They're still going to have social distancing regulations. It's near impossible to hold a band practice unless you are a rock band with 1.5 meter distancing. You know, there's still regulations and restrictions from territorial headquarters in Australia saying that you can't have a certain amount of people even on set for an online meeting. You can only have 10 people in the hall or even less. And that's including your sound and streaming guys and everything. So for me, from a composition perspective, we have a lot of time right now. If there's the obvious that inspiration can hit you at any time, and now's probably a good time to do it, but there's also the realistic side of the coin, that there is going to be this influx of charts coming into a funnel. That only so many charts can be included in a program. You know, New York Staff Band or the ISB, they're not going to play a 3-hour program. There's only 20 charts you can play in an actual concert. And in that, you're not going to fill it up with new music straight away either. You still got to give the people what they want to hear. So for me, I'm sort of using it as a bit of a downtime. It's not a break from writing. I don't believe in taking a break. I'm a believer in, if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm not going to force pen to paper for the sake of writing something.
I think you're almost quoting Bill Hines there.
Yeah, look, and I did write.
You've done a
couple of things. So, look, I did write a couple of things earlier this year, and I only really finished them right before coronavirus hit in Australia, right before everything started going ballistic. One of those charts that I wrote was actually So Sweet.
Yes,
and I'm sure you've now seen by now. Yeah. We've got about
I had to hunt the song down.
18,000K.
The song was a really weird one. I don't think I'd ever heard it before.
'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus is a spiritual, I think.
Yeah.
So it's more American tune than what it would be an English tune.
Of this last song,
but to me, that is a classic example, because I wrote a swing arrangement, and it is due for publication this year, even though I only wrote it this year as well. They put it straight away into the publishing schedule. And for me, it's like, well, bands aren't going to be able to play. So I had a light bulb moment probably nearly 5 weeks ago now. I was like, well, you know, Corey Band is a very good band, and they've done these social distancing videos very, very well.
Yep.
And Philip Harper, what a writer himself. You know, he's just a fantastic conductor, writer, musical director. And musical direction is not about conducting; it's about leading your team. So he's great all round with that, and he really set the benchmark with that. And I was just sort of thought, I had this light bulb moment saying, you know what, I can play charts with anybody in the world I want to now, because this is what our gig is now.
Yeah.
And consequently, I ended up recording that video with 7 countries.
Yes, it was really
so I understand what it's like for you with your project, actually doing these interviews and trying to work with time zones at the moment. It's,
yeah.
You know, right now it's about 11 o'clock at night at the moment, and I'm trying to keep it down as best I can so I don't wake up the whole house.
I've got to phone Canada in a little while, so that's going to be fun.
Yeah, good stuff. Canada's a good place. I like it.
Never been. I'll name drop myself, but you spoke about Len Ballantyne, who's the conductor of the Canadian Staff Songsters. A very good friend of mine, Donna Harris, who's in the Canadian Staff Songsters and is a core music leader in Guelph. We've been trying to get together because she's done so many CDs with her vocal group and instrumentation stuff that I said I've phoned you, I've got to do Canada. I said I've got to speak to you from the Canadian viewpoint, so hopefully she'll do an interview as well. Although she dabbles, but I think she does more arranging than original composition, but could be wrong. But anyway,
I think that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point you got there, Morgan. We shouldn't disguise ourselves too much as composers when we're actually taking somebody else's tune and putting our own spin on it. It's, you know, composing itself is making something up from scratch. And we do that. We do that when we write. You look at all the good marches out there in the repertoire. You know, there's probably about 70% originality in most marches. And then they bring in a theme, you know, trying to think of what it is. Let's say Gullidge, Emblem of the Army.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wrote it for a military band, to get it published by the army, he had to lift up the banner in the middle.
Yeah.
Before that, there was nothing in it. So that's what a composer is. You know, I only class myself as a arranger because I don't do a lot of original work, but there is still a level of originality when you write counter melody. You know, you're writing your own chords. Yeah, it's interesting looking back on the videos that you've already done with guys like Dean Jones, Ian Feltwell, Sam Shelley was the last one as well, and Joel Collier. Dave Edmonds too, Mr. Christmas Mambo. Shout out to Dave, love your work. The thing is that if you were to give all of us a tune and select a tune, and you picked about 20 of us to try and arrange that tune, you would probably get 20 different variations.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to the point that if you were to go out and pick a verse of scripture and give it to 20 people in the room and say, right, I want you to underline which words speak to you the most, you're going to get 20 different responses.
What's the because we're going to have to end this here because I've got several other phone calls tonight, but I don't want to sort of cut you off really.
You're right.
Do you have a favourite scripture quote or a couple that sort of come back to you that's on the bedroom wall, on the fridge magnet kind of thing?
Mate,
outside of
I
Psalm
think for
150?
me, well, yeah, I can't go out of Psalm 150. I'm sorry. And it sounds very, very corny, but it's something that just comes back at me and back at me. And you'd appreciate this from a percussionist point of view, is that he doesn't say praise the Lord with cymbals.
Mm-hmm.
He says it again by saying praise the Lord with loud cymbals.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a reiteration that you need to do what you're doing and you need to keep at it. It's not just, I command you to do this. It's like, well, I'm commanding you to do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
So that to me, there's a lot more meaning in it than boom crash and
Absolutely.
whatnot in the whole loud cymbal thing. It's the fact that he's told us to do that twice. It's like, you know, I'm a parent of a very defiant 7-year-old girl, and even hours before this, I was having a tough time trying to get her to bed. And you know, no, you have to go to sleep. No, you have to go to sleep. You know, these are the things. It's not you're being told once; you're being reminded that you need to praise the Lord in whatever way you can.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it speaks to me.
Well, that's brilliant. I'm really glad to hear that. So, if you have no objection, I will do a prayer with you, and we'll call it quits and say thank you very much. But I will just, if that's okay with you. So,
sounds good, mate. It's bedtime for me, so.
Oh, that's enough. Lord, I pray for Sam, his work, his ministry, his talent, and the gifts you have given him, you know, in the musical ability. I just pray your blessing upon him and his family, his friends at this very tough time, that he will really find you close to him, walking with him as he continues on his day-to-day journey, and that the people he has spoken about, his mentors, his friends, his support network, will continue to enhance his life and ministry, and that he will also be able to return that to his friends and family, and that they will be able to have that wonderful support network of knowing you, Lord, knowing your love is there, guiding and strengthening us in all that we do. I pray for all those who receive a cream of peace on the stand, that they will rejoice and be able to get to the nuts and bolts of it and just enjoy the energy and the spirituality that shines through it. And that at the end of the day, it hopefully does what you intend it to do, and that he can feel the blessing of a job well done. So I just pray for him now, Lord. I thank him so much for his love for you and for the family. And I just commend him to your hands now for safekeeping as he continues to live his life in your name. Amen.
Thanks, Morgan.
You're very welcome, sir.